Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am delighted to be joined by Natasha Meikle. Welcome back to the studio, Natasha. How are you?
Great, it's nice to be back in here.
Now, Lawrence is unable to make it. He's failed a late fitness test and he will not be with A Celtic State of Mind today, but we are here and we will be utilising as many comments as we possibly can from the comments section. So please get involved if you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook and Twitter. We are aware that England and Germany are playing today. Somebody's just had a wee go at us. Sorry for being a wee bit late, but we're just trying to sort out my camera angle, but we know that that's beyond sorting. So thanks for being involved. Anything else you want to wade in on, please do so. Loads is happening at Celtic. But look at the headline, Natasha. Celtic fan media has been embraced by the club and we are here to stay. Quite defiant, and I think that the defiance comes not only from the fact that it went so well last week. Other than the obvious, it went so well, but there has been a huge backlash to fan media being involved. I tweeted about it yesterday. The one thing I would say to kickstart this discussion is that straight away that we're not talking about all mainstream media. We're certainly not talking about that because the mainstream media as a whole cannot be described as being all the same. There's plenty out there who are excellent. Now, someone has told me there's echo, so while you discuss that and give us a wee update, Natasha, I will sort out that echoing, okay? So over to you.
Excellent. Yeah, no, it was absolutely brilliant to attend that fan media conference, and it's great that Celtic invited us. Really, it's something that we've been saying for a long time over the course of last season, is that one of the key issues is the lack of fan engagement, and that was heavily criticised last season. So the fact that this club have now recognised that and are taking steps to address it can only be seen as a positive. And maybe that is the influence of Dominic Mackay coming in, who is apparently very keen on fan engagement and fan media and rebuilding that relationship with the fans. So that was a good step forward. So with that in mind, how did the press conference go? For me, 90% of it was absolutely excellent. I think that the vast majority of people in the room, I don't know if anyone can still hear me. We're getting a few comments through that nobody can hear me right now. So
no, it should be absolutely fine.
I will continue to talk, and if you can't hear me, then I'm just talking to Paul. So for me, the vast majority of the fan media conference was absolutely excellent. The people in the room were really well informed, the questions were really well posed, and it all came across very professionally. For me, the questions that were asked by the other fan media contributors were exactly the sort of things that other fans wanted to hear. And yes, we had the press conference before it, and yes, we got a lot of information from that. But what we got from the fan press conference for me was an insight into things that the fans wanted to know. Now, I do accept that not all of the questions were to everyone's taste. If we can call some of them questions at that. I'm not really going to get into the realms of whether that question or that statement should have been posed or not, and everyone's got their own views on that, because I don't think there's a need to focus on the 2% of that conference that's caused a little bit of controversy when the rest of it was so well run. It was well run by the club, it was well run by the people who attended, and it was really well answered by Postecoglou and Mackay. What we have seen, however, is some elements of mainstream media, and I'm not talking about all of them because we know that there's some really good people who work there, but some elements of mainstream media have latched on to one element of that press conference and decided to use it to criticise it. And for me, it's actually very condescending. Some of the things that I have been reading professional journalists say is very condescending, and what they're not bearing in mind is that the people who attended that press conference are by and large just Celtic fans who love the club and wanted to take the opportunity to pose questions to the new manager and the new CEO. And these people do media as a hobby. They do it because they enjoy it, and they do it because they're passionate about Celtic. The mainstream media being snide about the questions that were asked it's just really disappointing, to be honest, and it's quite patronising. And for me, it shows a lack of of awareness of the fuller situation, and perhaps the lack of actual having watched the press conference. Because for me, anybody who watched that full press conference could only come away from it better informed about the manager, better informed about the CEO, better informed about the direction the club was heading, and having had questions they would have wanted to ask answered. So if you can come away from a 45-minute press conference with that, then that's only a positive. So yeah, the mainstream media criticism, some people have suggested they feel threatened, they feel rivaled, but one thing that I think we can take from it is that there is certainly a place for fan media, and it's certainly here to stay.
Yeah, apologies. Obviously, we will be talking about how the conference didn't get off to a good start. Neither did this broadcast. That was my fault, and I've plugged all the right cables in, and we'll give you an extra 3 minutes at the end of the show to make up for it. So there you go. JJax67 fan conference was excellent, and I think we're going to lead with this, obviously. We're not going to focus the entire 1 hour show on it, Natasha, but we're in a kind of time of change. We're in a time of people being able to get organised and create content. And we've heard a lot of criticism around, all right, so I'll buy a headset, build a YouTube channel, and I'll get in as well. And well, yeah, if you do it well, and if you create the content and build an audience, I'm pretty sure you'll be welcome to that. But this isn't something that's happened overnight. So the first meeting I had with Celtic in relation to trying to get involved with what they were doing in and around the stadium was about 3 years ago. And it's taken that length of time. We've obviously been broadcasting for 4 years, but it's taken that length of time for the club and ourselves to reach an understanding and have a platform where we can go on, and we're able to actually ask the manager, the CEO. You had the opportunity, Natasha, recently to ask Scott Brown, the outgoing captain, questions as well. And it's important because when we started up a Celtic State of Mind, I was looking at platforms such as the Anfield Wrap. You'll be aware of the Liverpool Football Club platform. It's absolutely outstanding. It was groundbreaking. There are others down south that people look at and think, are at the top of the tree. There has been a real change in the attitude of mainstream media towards fan media across the board, in that whenever something happens at Liverpool, you switch on Sky Sports and they'll be talking to someone from the Anfield Wrap. They speak to people from various other platforms, Manchester United, the Stretford Paddock. You see them being asked by the mainstream. And I think what's important to note is that we're not saying the mainstream media as a whole are wrong. There's some fantastic people working within mainstream broadcasters and titles, some of whom I know, Natasha, you've had the pleasure of meeting. Everybody has their kind of opinion on whether or not fan media should speak to the mainstream media broadcasters. And that's something that both we have been criticised for, Natasha, and praised for. In equal measure, I don't know. Maybe it's 50-50. Who knows? But that's another question for another day. We were invited along on Friday. You took great pleasure in attending in person, which in itself, going to Celtic Park in person, Natasha, was great.
Lovely. Lovely to be there.
How many groups were there? Maybe 9 groups, something like that?
Yeah, I'd say maybe about 9 or 10 fan representatives of the different media groups. And like we've touched on, I've met a lot of them before. I've not met all of them before. But in general, so impressed with the quality and delivery of the questioning.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we got sent the recording, as did all the platforms. And the way that the club deal with that is they allow you to use it as you wish. So some people have blogs, they'll use it as blogs. A lot of the channels operate as audio podcasts. They can put it out there. We use it on the visual aspect of it. But instead of putting it out as a full video, we're using it as discussion points on bulletins. We're putting it out on the social media. Most people will have seen it, but let's digress a wee bit from the conversation and look at some of the points made by Ange and then deconstruct them. And I think that's the way that we'll be using the press conferences this season. And I'm sure quite a few of them will be attended by yourself. So first up, Natasha, we'll draw a line under that, because mainstream media, they're not all the enemy. And this is coming from someone who's Father's employment was threatened by the mainstream media. Certain titles threatened and told them that they were lazy and they were to go back to work. You know, the Thatcherite Britain of the 1980s were not our friends, but they're not all like that. And that is a point I'm keen to make, because I've met some great people who work as professional journalists and broadcasters. Loads of them are Celtic fans, Natasha, and a lot of them have a great deal of respect for fan media. There were one or two articles that came out that I think were poking fun based on that opening question. It wasn't even a question, but you've got to remember that the press conference was, I think, 55 minutes long. There was a certain individual representing ACSOM who wasn't happy with the answer that they got, so you pushed them even further. And that's what it was all about. It was about challenging the narrative, even if it means you're speaking to an incoming CEO who I think is very articulate, very eloquent in the way that he comes across. But if you're unhappy with what he's saying, you challenge. And you know, as long as you've got that kind of middle ground where you're not just doing it for the sake of it or to be confrontational, you can challenge. And going into that, I kind of thought to myself, I want to hear about who's signing players. I want to hear about the Eddie Howe deal. I want to hear about when was Ange identified. Whose decision was it to bring him in? Is he going to be keeping John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan? Is Peter Lawwell still in the building? Is our recruitment strategy going to change for next season? Are we going to be ready in what is now 21 days' time to face Midtjylland with a team strong enough to get us through to the next part of the Champions League? I don't think any of that was missed out, Natasha. I think that was all covered.
I mean, that's it. Like, when I went into that press conference, I had long lists of questions that I wanted to ask. We knew we were going to get one to each of them. Obviously, I have a list of questions I wanted to ask them both, similarly to any Celtic fan would. And what was pleasing for me is that, you know, obviously I chose the question out of mine that I wanted to ask. But the rest of my list were covered by the rest of the contributors there. You know, we were all on the same page. We were all clear about what we wanted to be covered. And it was. Did I follow up with Dom on his answer? Yes, I did. That's maybe the lawyer in me coming out. Too used to that cross-examination. But with Dominic Mackay, I feel slightly he often veered into answering his own question rather than the question that had been asked. There's no doubt that he is a very polished presenter and a very polished communicator in a manner that reminds me of a politician. But you could equally say that means that he perhaps doesn't always give a straight answer to the question and is slightly vague. I thought he was maybe slightly vague on the question I posed to him, so it was good just to be able to follow up and get that slight more clarity, which he gave. The clarity was, of course, that there is no set structure in place. We'll come on to that and we'll come on to discussing that. But it was good to be able to have the opportunity to put the question to him and then get some clarity on that. And I think both of them handled the questioning really well, and I think their answers were, for the most part, informative and encouraging. Yeah,
I agree. I understand over the last wee while as well that the comments haven't been utilised as much as you would expect, so we're going to be bringing up as many as we possibly can today. Feed the Bear, you are a regular on YouTube. Welcome back to the show. I'm also going to be showing you, thanks for Daniel telling us it's absolutely boiling outside because we can't enjoy it. I'm wondering, Daniel, is that your avatar? Is that from the Hoops Bar? It looks like the painting that's on the Hoops Bar wall. And so we will continue to dip in and out of the comments section. Let us know your thoughts on the reaction. Let us know your thoughts on the content of what Ange and Dom, I'm talking like I know them, first name terms, Ange and Dom. And when you were talking about cross-examination, I was nodding as if I have loads of experience of being cross-examined. Believe me, that's not the case. But I've got a few videos that we'll play, and then we'll deconstruct them as well. But hopefully I have them all in a line and they come out in order. But here's the first question coming up from, the first answer rather, coming up from Ange Postecoglou, the new boss.
You know, I'm just as concerned as everyone else. It's a great challenge for us, no doubt. You know, as I said, we've got some challenges at the moment, particularly with you know, our squad, but we're working hard. And I kind of said upstairs, the way I work is I'm not looking too far ahead. What's most important to me is that the work we do today is the best possible work, and so we can be ready against Midtjylland in the Champions League. I know how important the game is, and I know how anxious the supporters are for us to do well. I know it's important, for the club itself to show that we're heading in a new direction, and I'm well aware of all those things, but I can't control what's going to happen in 4 weeks' time. I can control what happens today and tomorrow and for the next sort of 4 days, I think it is, that we've got before that game, and I'll make sure we're as ready as we possibly can be. But there's no doubt everyone in the club is well aware that we need to we do a lot of hard work to get the squad to where we want it to be, and everyone in the club is working hard towards that. What I will assure the supporters that when we come out here for that first game, they'll see a Celtic team that will already have elements of the kind of football I want to play, and more importantly, belief in something that hopefully will make us special in sort of the years to come.
So we're talking about getting prepared, Natasha, for Midtjylland in now 21 days' time. I'll keep the countdown going. We normally get JP on the countdown. I've seen various people discussing what Celtic are going to actually look like in terms of a lineup. But what I tend to do is I'm talking about the lineup as it possibly can stand right here and now. I've seen loads of lineups where there's new signings coming in. We haven't signed anybody. Now, we joked months ago that the back four would be Ralston, Welsh, Beaton and Taylor. I've still got that as my back four, but I've got a question mark around Beaton because we don't know the future in relation to Chris Ayer. Now, Celtic fans, a lot of Celtic fans, because I don't speak for every Celtic fan, a lot of Celtic fans were impressed by Ange Postecoglou at that press conference. I'm wondering, will he have the same impact on a playing staff who are maybe low in confidence and a playing staff who a few of them, may be looking at the exit door? Could we save somebody like Chris Ayer? Do you think we've got to write off Ayer, Christie and Edouard and pick a team from the rest? Or indeed, will they be lined up for moves but they might still play in the first couple of rounds for Celtic?
It'll be interesting. I think one thing Postecoglou has to do is he has to decide, are these players who have one eye on the door, potential opportunities out with Celtic, is there any possibility of them buying into this new era? Is there any chance of him changing their mindset, getting to them to buy into what he's going to do and commit to the club? He needs to decide that, or make himself aware of that situation very quickly. Because if the answer to that is no, then we need to them to move on as quickly as possible. We saw last year the negativity that occurred as a result of holding on to players who didn't want to be here for an extra season. We managed to almost force their hand and make them stay for an extra year. This season we can't use that tactic again. It didn't work last season. If Ange can't get them to fully commit and buy into this new era under him, then they need to leave as quickly as possible. For me, Christie's one that might be on the fence. But if we're talking about Ayer, we made promises to him and he's been very clear about that in his interviews. We made a promise to him that he could leave this year. That will 100% be in his head, and I don't think there's any turning back on that now. I think we would find ourselves in a difficult position if we don't move him on this year, and it would result in a very unhappy player. But if we've known that we made that promise a year ago, then we should have plans in place for now, because we knew the situation was coming a year ago when we made that promise to him. So Ayer, I think, is one we have to accept is out the door, and we have to look at the defenders that we have in front of us. Like you've mentioned, the timing is a key concern. It's something that obviously that I put to Ange Postecoglou, is that we are concerned at how close these Champions League qualifiers are coming, and how prepared are we going to be. It's been well documented how the Celtic fans believe that the club are far too often underprepared going into these qualifiers, and we really want to avoid that happening again. But the closer we get to them, the closer we get to the reality that it is happening again. What Ange said in that press conference is that he shares these concerns. He echoes the concerns of the fans. He's aware of the timescales he's operating in. But what he said is that he can only take it one day at a time. He can only deal with today, tomorrow, the day after, and so on. It's encouraging to hear that he thinks that by the time those Champions League qualifiers come around, that he will have had a strong influence on the squad, that we'll be seeing football the way he wants it to be played. So while I'm not sure that we'll see the squad he wants on the pitch to start the season with. I don't think the squad will be in its final form at all. I think there will still be work to be done before the start of the league season. Maybe we'll get a couple of players in, but I think the squad rebuild in terms of personnel will still be ongoing. But I think what we might see is the influence of Postecoglou's philosophy and style of football. So that's a step forward. The personnel still is a concern for me.
It definitely is. And he spoke about some individual players throughout the press conference, and we'll touch on that as well. Tommy Rogic, the new captain, the potential for a new captain. He spoke about Lee Griffiths as well. And Michael Riley comes in to say that the mainstream media are threatened by your competence. And the irony of that is that we set this up with bad sound, an echo, and then no sound. But I get what you're saying, Michael. We do try our best, and we're constantly trying to improve what we're doing on a Celtic state of mind. And throughout this season, there will be additional ACSOM shows, as well as the Bulletin, as well as the match day coverage of both the men's and the women's teams, and as well as Scream of Celica, which is our Tuesday night show with Russell and Kevin Graham. We will have other shows. We've got some big plans for pre-produced shows that we'll put out, and that will involve members of the ACSOM team who I'm very, very delighted to have as part of a Celtic state of mind. We've built that team over the last year, and I think that it's very impressive when you look at the wealth of experience and knowledge. And it's also important to have different voices, because people seem to label the old school Natasha as Celtic Daz, so it's good to have young people like Declan and Amy involved.
I thought you were going to say young people like me there, Paul.
And yourself. So we've got a good cross section.
I'll take that.
Yeah, well, the thing is as well, what I would like to say, Natasha, is there was a bit of kind of feedback we were getting saying that, oh, you've attended one press conference and, you know, yous are all going to be singing from Celtic's hymn sheet and yous all believe that Ange is the Messiah. Absolutely not. I mean, talking around the managerial position up to the day that he was announced, we all had our opinions on who should be the manager, who shouldn't be the manager. To be honest, and you've got to be honest in these situations, Ange Postecoglou was nowhere near on any of our radars until the name was mentioned in the mainstream media. And I think that when you look at what some of the mainstream journalists are doing and the good work that they're doing, they're still breaking stories, Natasha. They still have sources. They still have relationships with managers and players and ex-managers and players. And they're able to tap into that in a way that you hope ACSOM will get to that stage. I mean, we do have a number of people that we speak to who are close to the club or close to certain players. We do have ex-players and managers. It's a lot more difficult these days to have any relationship with any current players, because that's a no-no as far as the clubs are concerned. And I think the key would be that there's broadcasters and journalists who are prepared to move with the times, and because they're doing that, they will always be part of the media game. Of course they will. And I think fan media is something that can complement that. It's not as though you're going out to try and destroy something that's been there for hundreds of years. You're trying to complement it and work alongside it and give a different view, because a lot of these broadcasts and journalists can't say what they're actually thinking, whereas I think, although it needs to be balanced in fan media, you do have that freedom to give far more opinion-based comment as well, don't you, Natasha?
Yeah, I think that's it as well. You know, we don't have any agenda here other than we're fans who are promoting our own opinions and giving a voice to the fans. We're not saying we're giving a voice to every fan. We're not saying that we represent the views of every fan or that we're more entitled than any other fan. We're just using the platforms that we have built through the hard work of the team here to produce content for other fans to enjoy. And it's great that we're able to do that without any other agenda than being Celtic focused. I think something that we saw in the press conference was that the press conference questions and the fan media conference questions were similar, in my opinion, in terms of their quality. But in the Celtic fans media one, I think there was just a slight edge to it that meant it led more on what the fans wanted to hear about. The media press conference, the sort of traditional journalists, they asked the questions we absolutely expected to be asked. When we got to the fans, I think there was more of an element of what do the fans want to hear from their manager and their new CEO here. The traditional press aren't going to ask all those questions for us. So it's great that we're able to use fan media to ask some of the questions that are on the fans' mind. One that comes to mind to me, and I can't remember who asked it, it was a great question. Talk to Postecoglou about the Celtic Foundation and the work that they do and how he would get involved in it and the importance he saw in it and the importance of getting the players involved in it and how important that was to Celtic as a club and our heritage and our culture and what it meant to the fans. Now, that's the sort of question that would never come out in a traditional journalism press conference, but it did come out in the fan media press conference and it gave us an insight into Ange's thinking in that area. And was something that, I think the fans took a lot from. I think the fans really enjoyed hearing his response to that and really enjoyed hearing his views and his philosophies and how that aligned with ours. So I think the fan media side of things can really enhance the media content and it asks these sorts of questions and gets into this sort of detail that we might not otherwise hear from the manager and the CEO on.
No, you're absolutely right, because every nuance of the club is covered in detail on a daily basis on ACSOM, and that's just our platform. Like you say, there was about 10 at that press conference, and there's many others out there who are creating content. So every intricacy of Celtic Football Club is covered in detail, and there's a lot that mean a lot to the fans that doesn't mean anything to a journalist who just wants to know about the new signing, the next game, the reaction to the last game, and so on. So yeah, I think we're definitely here to stay. And we're going to continue to improve and become more and more professional as we figure out the tech side of things, Natasha. Now, coming in from Facebook, hello everyone, listening from Fermanagh. Hail, hail, keep it green and white. And a big hail, hail to you. Unfortunately, I don't know who sent that message, but thanks for getting involved. Here's an interesting one. You and Boy Martin, what happens if we don't get a big enough offer for Ajer? Well, this is what I was asking there. You've got Ajer, Christie and Edouard. There's loads of moves coming and going, and we'll talk about a few of those. But there is a possibility that come that first game in 21 days' time, we haven't had a big enough offer for Ajer and he's still at the club. We haven't had a big enough offer for Edouard and he's still at the club. Or some clubs who were interested in Christie have watched his fleeting appearance in the Euros and they've seen somebody better at that tournament and they go and spend their money on him. So I'm not writing them off entirely. So when I'm talking about a defence, I've got Ajer and Beaton as a question mark, because if it's not Beaton, then Ajer, and I'd much rather it was Ajer. One of the other players that I'm interested in is someone who I think I had written off last season, and it was Tommy Rogic. And instantly, a wee bit like one of the mainstream articles I read yesterday, you think about Australia and you automatically think, oh, well, all the Australian players at the club are going to do well, or we're going to sign more Australian players, which is a bit of a nonsense, to be honest with you. But he's worked with Tommy Rogic, and he was asked about Tommy Rogic as well, in relation to his own future at the club, Natasha. Now, I was interested because we had Alan Morrison on the show 2 weekends ago, and he spoke about the fact that Tom Rogic and the way he plays is actually better suited to an Ange Postecoglou team than David Turnbull. So I don't know if that concerns you or not, but this is what Ange had to say about Tommy Rogic.
Yeah, no, obviously I know Tommy very well, and I had him in the national team when I was national team manager, and extremely talented player. He's one of those players who I think people are happy to pay to watch, because he can turn some ordinary moments into something special. My understanding is he's had some problems, particularly with his body over the last period, and I think that's probably been his biggest challenge. Even when I had him in the national team, was consistently trying to get him to a certain level from his body point of view. I haven't had a good chat to him yet, so I'll certainly be doing that with him and the rest of the players. And does he fit into the style of football I want to play? Absolutely. But Tommy knows me better than anyone in that dressing room right now, and he knows that I treat everyone the same. I set us off in a certain direction, and the ones who want to be a part of that are part of that, and the ones who maybe can't be or don't want to be, then will fall by the wayside. But he's certainly someone who I'm looking forward to working with again. I'm hoping we can get him fit and playing the football that I know he's shown here at different times. And I know he can show in my style of football because he's already done it with the national team.
So we know that Ange Postecoglou has worked with Tommy Rogic. Tom Rogic is a fan's favourite, Natasha, he is. And I remember a very interesting conversation that Tony had on the podcast, talking about the fact that he's always in the forefront of your memory because when he performs, it's something special. It's like he's one of these players that he doesn't score a bad goal. Every goal, it's like, remember Letitia for Southampton, every goal he scored was absolutely top drawer. And 5 or 10 minutes into the game he was knackered and he was never 100% fit, but give him the ball in a certain area of the park, he could win you the game. I'm not comparing Letitia to Rogic, that's the first time I've ever thought about the two of them in the same breath, but I think Tom Rogic, I'd written him off last season. I thought that he contributed very little during the season, and I don't think I would have been too disappointed had he been one of the players that's leaving the building. However, Ange adds a new dimension to that. So I'm thinking David Turnbull, absolutely brilliant first season at Celtic, should have been playing earlier, of course, and I would build my team around him. But now I've got this element of doubt because Alan Morrison's telling me that, David Turnbull doesn't suit Ange Postecoglou. Postecoglou spoke pretty positively about Tommy Rogic. Do you think we're going to see Tom Rogic Mark II now that Ange is in the hot seat?
I certainly hope so. Everyone knows I'm a big fan of Tom Rogic, and I think he has been absolutely excellent for the club in the past. And saying that, I fully expected him to leave this summer. I think that's probably the end of his cycle. Perhaps it was last year, but I really fully expected to see Rogic leave this summer. Postecoglou coming in is a bit of a curveball, and it throws into doubt whether Rogic will actually leave this summer or whether there is this second chance for him at Celtic to revitalise his career. And hearing Postecoglou talk at that press conference, I'm inclined to think there is a chance for Tom Rogic here to go on and have that second spell at Celtic, if you like. I think it will largely depend on his fitness. Postecoglou himself referred to the fact that Rogic has had problems with his body over the last years. We're talking. Postecoglou himself referred to 2 or 3 years he has been struggling with fitness. If we can resolve those issues, or at least resolve them to a sufficient extent that allows him to go on and have a really big impact on games, if we can do that, then I think Rogic could be a real key player for Postecoglou. He said himself, no one in the dressing room knows Postecoglou better than Tom does. He plays the style of football Postecoglou likes to play. He's a player he knows well. He's a player he's worked with before. If you look at all those elements on paper, and especially when you consider how long Rogic has been at Celtic, all those elements on paper look like a recipe for success, that he is going to go on and be a key player next season. The only thing that will stand in the way of that is Rogic's own fitness levels. If we can manage that to a good enough level, then I really think he could have a great season for us going forward.
I'm thinking in simplistic terms, Natasha. Some would say that I always do when it comes to football. But we've got two players there who fit the same role and who both have issues in terms of fitness. Now, we know that David Turnbull, a lot of that is due to the fact that he was off for so long and he's obviously building himself back up to the point where you would expect 90 minute after 90 minute. But last season, he wasn't playing many 90 minutes. Tommy Rogic could come in for a cameo. And I don't think for a moment that it would be wise to sell 2 of the number 10s that we've got. And I'm going to include Ryan Christie in there, because he can play that position. Although he can play elsewhere, I think him, Rogic and Turnbull is your 3 number 10s. I still think Christie will leave the club. Let's keep Turnbull and Rogic. Let's utilise both of them. If you could get 90 minutes out both those players, I'm happy with that, because both of them can bring magic. You've got the set-piece ability of David Turnbull. I was disappointed that we didn't see an appearance from Turnbull. I think when Ryan Fraser came on was the moment that you could have thrown Turnbull in. He could have given you that bit of magic that you needed. But Amy Canavan comes in. Rogic has been mismanaged as well. Let's not forget that. We're not going to go on about the Neil Lennon outburst last week, Natasha. I think that's been covered. But yes, I don't think he was managed that well under Neil Lennon. And hopefully we can see the real Tommy Rogic stepping up. Other points coming in. GG on YouTube. Surprise Rogic fit his style as he doesn't have the stamina. So give him half a game and give Turnbull another half a game. There you go. Problem solved. And then, we've got Zinko fix coming in when Rogic is on his game. He floats through that midfield. Genius on the ball. His injuries and fitness have let him down. 100% they have. But I'm a great believer as well that when you look at players like Tom Rogic, Natasha, 28, Lee Griffiths, 30. If it's a fitness thing, get them fit. Again, I'm just being a simpleton here. Get them fit. I mean, we've got everything at our disposal as a so-called elite football club. Get them fit, and then you'll get your 90 minutes out of them, or you'll get what you want out of them. Because, as I said with Rogic, he's inconsistent. Even if he's fit or unfit, he's inconsistent anyway. But if you've got him and Turnbull in the squad, I think it's a decent weapon to have. Talking about players leaving, players coming in, we're in the season of different players being linked to Celtic every single day. And I won't labour them. I mean, we could maybe have some kind of transfer shows specific to the incomings and the outgoings, maybe at the weekend, so I won't labour them. But we've already lost Armstrong Okoflex to West Ham United. Disappointed with that one? No too fussed?
A bit of a difficult one, really. He didn't show a great deal for me in any of the chances that he got, but I fully accept that he didn't get the amount of chances that I would have liked to have seen him get, particularly over Kennedy's last 10 games in charge towards the end of the season. I didn't see there being any reason why Okoflex and Dembele and players like that shouldn't have been given more of a chance to show us what they can do. The counter-argument to that, of course, is that Kennedy, Strachan, Lennon before him saw these players every single day on the training pitch.
Yeah.
They are the ones who are fully aware of what they can do. Just because we are not seeing them for 90 minutes at the weekend doesn't mean that they aren't being properly assessed by the club during the training sessions every single day, every single week. Of course, that doesn't make up for the fact that, they're not getting match time, but perhaps we have to accept that either Kennedy, Strachan, whoever is making these decisions, didn't see enough in that player to want him to stay, or that the player himself didn't want to stay at Celtic, which is, again, entirely possible given the outgoing of youth players we're seeing at the moment at Celtic. And that's one thing that I really hope the club can address, is that we don't lose promising youth players, regardless of whether Armstrong Okoflex fits into that category or not, or whether he had the talent. I don't know. Taking that point aside, what we need to make sure is that if there are youth players at that sort of age that we want to make sure stay at the club, that we're not losing them to clubs like West Ham. We need to make Celtic an attractive enough option to make them think that this is the best possible route for their career development. We need to make them want to stay at the club and think that this is what I need to do to better and further and enhance my career. I hope that a new structure, I hope that the introduction of a Colts team, I hope Postecoglou, I hope Mackay, I hope the whole combination of all these things can help address that issue, because we have seen far too many youth players leaving the club at the moment. Yeah,
and it was touched on. John Mackay spoke about the Colts team being a big part of that. And you look at some of these players who are leaving and who have left previously. We've heard about the development of Hepburn at Bayern Munich as well recently. These guys weren't getting the games, they weren't getting competitive football, and we know that at the moment, or next season rather, it's going to be fifth tier, but already moves are afoot for Celtic and the Rangers coach to go up a step. And then once that happens, if the players are getting competitive football and they start coming through the leagues, it's more of a viable option to keep young players at Celtic. You look at Okoflex's start to his football career. He goes from Arsenal to Celtic to West Ham United. The boy's got something, but obviously we've not been able to utilise that. And next season it would probably be a case of you're not going to be part of the first team at Celtic. You might be involved in the Colts in the fifth tier of Scottish football, and he's thinking, no thanks, I'll go to the EPL. So this is a legacy issue with a few players who will probably still lose, Natasha, but we're hoping that the next generation that are coming through won't go the same way. And one player I hope that doesn't go the same way as a legacy issue is Dembele. There's not been much said about him. A few clubs apparently were interested in Karamoko, but Jack Hendry's another one who's left. Not surprised that he's on his way to Ostend. I think there comes a point in a player's career, and I've spoken to a lot of ex-players who say this as well, Natasha, where things just fit. So a player fits with a club and they have a golden period at a certain club, and then they leave, and they leave for more money or because there's a big offer, and things are never quite the same. And I mean, I'm not talking about just the likes of Jack Kendry, but you've seen it with players down the years. Torres, for example, you make a transfer and it just doesn't work. Robbie Keane, you would have thought Robbie Keane in Liverpool would have been a fantastic fit at that time of his career, but it wasn't. And it looks as though Jack Kendry's found his fit in Belgian football. So fair play to him that he's went away after being written off by a lot of Celtic fans. And then he went to Australia, had a terrible injury. So fair play to him. He's come back and he's carving out his own career. So all the best to Jack Kendry. To be honest with you, I'd have rather he was available to us in 21 days' time to select at centre half. But he's gone and we wish him all the best. It'll be very frustrating, however, if in the next 6 months they twist that into a £10 million profit.
Oh, I think I can see that happening. I think there's a lot of rumours circling about that already. In fact, there's rumours circling that he could already be sold on before he plays another game for them. So perhaps that's just excellent business by them or they've seen something in Jack Kendry that we didn't see. They've obviously utilised their 1.5 million, whatever, buy clause that they have, and then they're going to sell him on for a profit. Because let's look at him on paper. If you are seeing a boy of that age playing in that league, getting widely touted as the best defender in that league, playing at centre half, if you were Celtic right now, that's the sort of player you'd be targeting. That's the sort of player we'd be thinking, that's exactly what we want to bring into the club. And unfortunately for Jack, it just didn't work at Celtic. I'm happy for him that it's worked out well in Belgium, but obviously from a Celtic perspective, it's hugely frustrating that we weren't able to get the best out of him here, or that he wasn't able to get the best of himself while he was here. And it has just fitted better in Belgium. And the way that the contract was structured means that he's able to move there, and then they're able to sell him on for a profit. Frustrating from a business perspective, frustrating from a footballing perspective, but great to see Jack making something of his career, and all the best to him.
Absolutely. Lubo Larson makes a good point. Do Celtic have a sell-on clause for Jack Kendry? We spoke about the fact that the deal was done a year ago. When he goes to Ostend, there's a buyout clause. So there's not a great deal you can do at that stage, although he was still Celtic's player. And Ostend takes up the clause. Has there been a clause inserted in that we're unaware of? Let's hope it is. And if he goes for 10 million or 8 million quid, Celtic are actually saying, well, actually, we've made maybe 2.5 million off this player rather than the 1.5 that's been reported. Someone else comes in, follower Celtic. Well said, Semi Pukki didn't fit with Celtic, goes to Norwich, fits brilliantly, and he scored goals elsewhere as well. Shane Duffy, there's another example of it. It just didn't fit. And I think that when you have got a player like Kendry leaving the club, then you wish him all the best. And the same as Klamala. One that some fans might struggle to wish all the best to is Bolingoli. It looks as though he's on his way as well. Natasha, no tears will be shed, or do you just wipe the slate clean and play him?
It's very difficult. I think with Bolingoli, he was almost the catalyst for that's too hard to put on him, for the catalyst of everything that went wrong. That's unfair. It was, what I would say though, it was the first thing that went wrong in a long list of things that went wrong this season, and we never really seemed able to recover from that. His decision to go to Spain was absurd in the circumstances, and it really, really cost Celtic. When we sort of, dropped those games, we never recovered from that. We never were able to claw that back, and we just bounced from there from one disaster to the next. Was Bolingoli harshly treated when you look at the rule breaches that then followed? Yes, maybe he was. He was probably the first one to have made such a breach of the COVID rules, and he was treated very harshly, both by the media. The fans were very critical, the government were very critical. He took a lot of heat for that. Subsequent rule breaches perhaps didn't see as much heat. So there is an element of debate in that, whether he was treated too harshly. And if we're going down that route, let's say, okay, maybe everyone jumped the gun and really judged him for doing something that was, of course, completely wrong. But was he treated too harshly? For me, I don't think so. But let's take the position that he was treated too harshly and that he could have a future at Celtic. Celtic struggle in fullback positions. We look at the fullback options we have at our disposal at the moment, and they are very, very limited. We have a player like Bolingoli on the books. Do we try and utilise him? Do we see him as a potential option for next season, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in? does retaining ball and goalie, in fact, just cut down the long list of players that we need to buy in? There's a long shopping list. There's a lot of positions we need filled. Should we consider ball and goalie as one that fixes the left back position and cuts down on the job at hand?
I think that this is going to be the approach. So, when the question was asked of Ange Postecoglou, he said here, he was actually asked around about not just players, but the backroom team, John Kennedy, Gavin Strachan. And what he said was the people who will be in that environment, talking about his Celtic environment, will be the ones who I think can drive us in the direction I want to go. Now, we're in the game here of looking at every single word that is uttered by a Celtic manager. And what I read into that, Natasha, is that there are certain people who are going to get a clean slate. So there's some comments coming in. For example, Zinko comes in, Kennedy must have something on the club. Well, what we know at this moment in time is that Kennedy is part of Ange's team. When he was pushed on it, he said that not necessarily people leaving, other people might come in. So at no point was John Kennedy or Gavin Strachan going to be surplus to requirements, according to what was said. We've been linked, and we will be linked to numerous dozens of players. Man City's Ko Itakura, Japanese internationalist, Mario Vuskovic of Hajduk Split, and also George Baldock of Sheffield United, all defenders. And there's talk that we are interested in these players. We've also heard about Aaron Hickey, Josh Doig as well. So my big question would be, these aren't players that we have just identified since Ange Postecoglou has come in the door. We have a system in place, Natasha, and even though you don't have a head of recruitment, you still have a scouting network who are still reporting back on their areas. So they're still continually, I think there's maybe 11 who are constantly, one of whom is Tosh McKinley, who did the scouting for Jack Hendry, in actual fact. So these guys are still doing their job. They're still doing their scouting. The scouting reports are still coming in. I would guess, even though you don't have specific members of that team in place, you will continue with your recruitment meetings. You will still be going into these meetings and saying, right, where are we with the left back scenario? And then these people are being served up. The decision making is the one question that I would need to ask, though. Who is making the decisions at this stage? I don't think that you're jumping the gun by saying that Peter Lawwell was massive in the decision-making process when he was at the club, and in particular the latter part of his tenure at the club. You would guess that due to the circumstances, Dominic Mackay has been involved in that process in the interim period, and you would hope that Ange Postecoglou would have the final say, because it's going to be him that falls by the performances of these new players. Is that a concern for you, even after hearing from both men on Friday? Who is signing the players?
I think what I've taken from it is that there is going to, as you've mentioned, there's going to be a short list of players. The scouting meetings are still going on. The identifying of targets is still going on. Postecoglou up until now obviously won't have been involved in that. These meetings have been going on all the time prior to his involvement, and we'll have, if you like, a database of players that we're interested in. I'm sure there will be different lists about key targets, long-term ones, players to keep an eye on. That will be ongoing. What Postecoglou will now have the chance to do is review these databases, review these lists. And from me, one thing I got from him from the press conference is he's very keen to make it his squad, not only in terms of the players on the pitch, but in terms of the backroom staff as well. I don't get the impression from him that he is going to get given a player. Mm-hmm. I get the impression from him that he's going to look at the players that have perhaps been identified, and if there's someone he likes the look of from that, then he's going to take that forward and have the final say in it. Equally, he knows football. He's done a lot of management. He's got a wealth of experience. Just because it's over the other side of the world doesn't mean it's not relevant experience. So what he can do for us is perhaps tap into a market that we've not yet utilised. Mm-hmm. So we can perhaps combine the work that the scouting network have been doing here and the players that they've identified. I hope that Postecoglou looks at that and, cherry picks what he's interested in from that. But equally, and from the press conference, I understand this is something he will be doing. Equally, I expect him to bring his own knowledge of players, his own targets, the own players he's interested in from the other side of the world, from the J-League, and use that to enhance our databases of players we're looking at. And from there, that's when I want to take that forward to actually signing players with Postecoglou at the head of it, having the final say. And from the character I understand him to be, from the answers he gave at the press conference, from everything I've read about him, and from Mackay's input as well, I do believe that it will be Postecoglou having the final say on anyone that comes through the door.
You hope so. I mean, it's been something, it's been a long shadow that's been cast over Celtic for a number of years. Sometimes it works. A player comes in and the manager didn't have anything to do with it and it turns out to work for the club. But a lot of the time, it's created a rift between the decision makers at the club and the manager. And we've seen that. We've obviously seen it with Brendan Rodgers, the classic example. So we do hope that that's going to be a step in a completely different direction. I thought it was interesting when Dominic Mackay was asked about his specific role, but the question was angled in such a way that they were asking, are you going to be involved in the football side? And his answer was he's going to be involved in every aspect of the club. So it wasn't as the Peter Lawwell job description stated when he came in, almost 18 years ago, all non-football commitments would be going to Peter Lawwell. Dominic Mackay isn't saying that at all, so there will be an involvement. Then you ask yourself, is that to be kind of expected when someone is coming into a game that they don't know that well, and there's a transitional period? Probably, but you don't want it to be an overbearing issue when you're losing out on players or you're bringing in players that the gaffer doesn't want. I mean, the classic example is Marvin Compere. You know, no manager brings in a £1.5 million centre-half and plays him for 60 minutes. It just doesn't happen. You know, Brendan Rodgers obviously didn't want that player at the club. Marian Sved, he alluded to that in the interview as well. Aidan McGrory, welcome to the show, Aidan. You're talking to us via YouTube. Anyone who's watching on YouTube and you've not already subscribed, please do so. We have a number of prizes that we're going to start advertising, and when you subscribe to YouTube, you'll be in a prize draw. We're talking signed items, framed items, signed jerseys, etc. And we'll be putting them out as soon as they've been framed. So please subscribe and help us to build our channel. Now, Tom Rogic, Near Beaton and Griffiths, the past few years have been here for years and can't play a full season fit. Time to move on. You need players you can count on. Now, this brings back to me something that was, we're waiting on that name-dropping klaxon going off here 52 minutes into the broadcast, Natasha, because Brian McClare once told me that basically if you look at the career of Alex Ferguson, if you couldn't play, he got rid of you. And when Brian McClare first went into the team, there was a whole crowd of players at Manchester United who had played under Ron Atkinson, who had a bit of a drink culture going on at that time, and it was players like Kevin Moran, Norman Whiteside, Brian Robson, Paul McGrath. And if you look at that clutch of players, the one player that survived was Brian Robson. So you either did what the gaffer wanted you to do, or he moved you on. Now, this is slightly different because we're not talking about a drink culture, but we're talking about fitness and availability. Mm. And I think when you look at Rogic, Beaton played 21 games. He didn't start 21 games. He was involved in 21 games last season, which was the same as Stephen Welsh. So not a great deal when you look at the fact that he's one of the most experienced players at the club. He's on one of the highest wages at the club. You want him to be available for selection every single week. And I think the same is going to be said about Griffiths. We're not going to labour the Griffiths argument, Natasha, but where are you on the Griffiths debate at the moment?
For me, Griffiths has had a lot of chances at Celtic. It's borderline unforgivable for me to come back from pre-season unfit and then not able to contribute to the season of such importance. If we had had a fit Griffiths, a fit Edward, playing up together that had worked so well the previous season, I think that could have had a serious impact on games. Griffiths' failure to get himself fit for that really cost us and really let us down, and it's hard to get over that feeling of being really let down by a player that you could have so heavily relied on. Ultimately, I will go with whatever decision Ange Postecoglou makes. If Ange Postecoglou, having known the situation, having discussed the situation with Griffiths, having had these talks, thinks that Griffiths can play an important role in next season, then I'll fully get behind that and support it. But that that decision has to come from Postecoglou. He can't be told that he needs to keep Griffiths. He can't be told that he needs to sell Griffiths. Again, let's compare it to what we've just said on ball and goalie. Are we in a position that we can really afford to be getting rid of strikers? That we can afford to be getting rid of any players, to be honest? Are we in that sort of position, or do we need to hold on to who we have and try and get the best out of them? That's obviously not the position I want Celtic to be in, but is that the position we are in? So for me, it has to come down to what Postecoglou thinks in terms of Griffiths. If it was my decision, I think I would probably be inclined to move Griffiths on in this window. I think he would have a very uphill battle to fight next season if he didn't get off to a good start. For me, it's the time to move him on. If Postecoglou thinks otherwise, then of course I'll support that decision, and it'll be interesting to see. From the press conference, Postecoglou's answers suggested that the talks were positive, that things were progressing well. The more recent reports over the last couple of days have suggested that isn't in fact the case, and that there perhaps is no new deal for Griffiths on the back of this. So it'll be an interesting one to see. Griffiths clearly at the moment suggesting that he's training, getting fit, working hard. Whether that's too little, too late, we will find out, or whether it's to contract negotiations, we shall see.
We shall see, and I think that the very fact that he's been doing a lot of kind of press as well, a lot of media work. Natasha, some Celtic fans are saying, why aren't you in the gym? Why are you on TikTok? Why are you on Instagram and on the telly? Get yourself into the gym. Get yourself fit. We don't always know the details of what's going on in the background, but I'm pretty sure Neil Lennon will give us his version of anything that he feels was part of the reason we didn't win the league last season. Now, we're going to play another video this time round. Ange touches on leaders and leadership. This is a big thing. We feel as though we've lost a lot of leaders. Regardless of your opinion on Peter Lawwell, Neil Lennon, Scott Brown, it's three big figures that have been lost to the football club. And he was asked a question on leaders. This is what he had to say.
Yeah, as you say, Scott has had an unbelievable career, and my understanding, I had an external view, but being in the club now, just what a massive influence he was, both on and off the park. A tremendous person and character, and always looked after the interests of the football club. So, but I guess everyone's journey comes to some sort of end, and he's looking at the next chapter of his career. That provides, I guess, opportunity now, and that can come from within, because I've always felt when people like a Scott Brown leave a club, then there's a vacuum, but maybe that also is an opportunity for somebody else to step up who may at different times have felt not comfortable being in that role. I think there's some people within the club that I think show some leadership qualities. But again, I'll take my time making that decision. I want to see, because obviously the environment's going to be different now. As a different manager, we're going to do things differently. As I said, I'm pretty strong on certain values and certain ways of doing things. So, I'll find the person who fits those values, and if that's in the football club, and I hope it is, because, again, I've always felt that, people within a football club who spend some time have a stronger attachment, understand the club better than bringing in somebody externally. We'll if that person exists there, I'll identify it, and because it is an important role, make him the leader of our football club.
We're talking about leadership, Natasha. Never more so rather than now, do Celtic need leaders. I keep going back to the point where John Barnes and Kenny Dalglish were unveiled as Celtic's new dream team. And, at that time, Kenny Dalglish's stock was still fairly high. That turned into a nightmare season, an absolute nightmare of a season. We spent a lot of bad money on bad players. And by the end of it, there was a 20-odd point deficit in terms of second place and first, and we know who won the league. And I've kind of used that as an example, because although the club are in a different place entirely now, and we've had a huge amount of success since then, I still see the rebuild as a certain kind of size and the same kind of magnitude, if you like. So Martin O'Neill came in, and he was able to do it in various different ways. But what he had to identify was the leaders he had at the club But then virtually every player that he brought in, there was a whole succession of leaders that he brought in. You could look at a player, even like Valharan. I remember O'Neill was doing the punditry during that summer, and he identified Valharan, and he identified him as a leader. There's a man who could have captained the club, no problem. He brought in players like Chris Sutton, a leader. He brought in players like Neil Lennon, who was undoubtedly a leader and who came later on in the season. And he was able to utilise players who were already at the club, like Mialbi, who was undoubtedly a leader. It's safe to say that even Petrov became a leader, as a Celtic player. And this is the type of thing that we need at the moment. We've lost big personalities from Celtic Football Club. And that question to Ange was around about the loss of leadership. He's obviously seen McGregor, and I think we've all been very impressed with a couple of games we saw at the Euros. He seemed to be revitalised. Lord only knows how, because of the amount of games that he plays. He doesn't get much rest, Natasha. Is he our leader? Do you see him and players like James Forrest and others stepping up to the plate here and becoming leaders for Celtic?
I certainly hope they do. If you were looking for someone as your next captain and the attributes they would need, I'm not entirely sure someone like McGregor, someone like Forrest, let's look at the other players who've been there that length of time, someone like Roderick. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure these players are the type of character who would scream captain material to me. They just don't seem to be the type. Maybe they are, maybe I'm doing them a disservice and the coaching staff will know that better than I do. But from a fan's perspective, I'm not sure that they are leaders. I don't see it on the pitch. Can McGregor be the one that grows into that role? What I would say is I think that it will be him, because I think that he's certainly been lined up to do it. Obviously, Scott Brown didn't get the game time he usually did before last season, and McGregor stepped into that role. So you're looking at someone now who has the experience of captaining Celtic for a long period of time. And he's also the one that gets lined up for the media duties. He's constantly wheeled out in front of the media, particularly when things were going bad last season. McGregor was the one who stood up and faced the cameras, and all credit to him, he did so very well. I think things like that are preparing him to take on the role of captain this season. As a lot of people have pointed out, we need stability. It's been well documented, Scott Brown's away, Lawwell's away, the manager's away. Yes, Kennedy and Strachan look to appear to be staying in some capacity, but if you're looking at stability, then I don't think you bring in a new player as a new captain. I think you have to look at someone who's been there for the length of time that Callum McGregor has, who has the experience that Callum McGregor has, who plays the number of games that Callum McGregor does in the team. And I think he is, of the players that are going to be left, going to be the standout option for captain. But when we were talking to Postecoglou at that press conference, he obviously hadn't had the chance to meet Callum yet. Callum was at the Euros. He said he texted him and congratulated him and wished him luck. He hadn't had the chance to meet him yet. So what I think is that there will be a chance for that meeting to take place. I think Postecoglou will finally get to meet him and learn about him as a player and a person. And I think from there, we will see McGregor appointed as the captain. But something Postecoglou made clear is that he wanted to take time to assess the squad in terms of who was staying and who was leaving, and Strachan's role and Kennedy's role. And from that, I think we can take that he feels the same about the captain's role. He was never going to just confirm that McGregor would be the next captain without actually meeting him and deciding for himself that McGregor was the captain that he was looking for. So I think once that meeting takes place, I think McGregor will be appointed as the next captain.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I was never too keen on the idea of someone coming in as a captain. I think that would be the first time I've ever seen that at Celtic Football Club. Incredibly, we haven't had that many official captains if you look down the line. And I don't think I'd be comfortable with that, because I'm thinking about, and I know it's about more than just, that pre-match huddle, but I'm thinking about someone coming in from a completely different country, not knowing Celtic, not knowing the game, and given that what's meant to be a rousing kind of chorus before we start the game. And I can't see a brand new player coming in and doing that. I can see McGregor doing it, I've got to say. I don't think Forrest could be that man. Some people have thrown Julien's hat into the ring. I thought Chris Ayer was a natural leader. I thought Chris Ayer would have been that man. But we're going to be looking for James Forrest to be a talisman anyway, albeit not a leader, maybe not a captain. He's definitely going to be talismanic. We don't have that up front. We don't have any player that I would say is a leader up front, and I think we've got far too few at the back. We certainly don't have a goalkeeper that you could say was a talisman at Celtic at the moment. Now, we have plenty more to discuss, and the big thing in relation to that press conference was some people in the mainstream media saw it as an opportunity to criticise the entire movement. I think it was called a toe-curling embarrassment by one. That was harsh. That was absolutely harsh. Do you think it was a masterstroke by Dom Mackay, and do you think that it was a message, it was actually a signal to some in the mainstream that Celtic are going to do it our way?
I hope so, and I think it's worked well if that is the case. I think Mackay has come in and very clearly seen that there is an issue in terms of engagement, and there's a damaged relationship between the fans and the board, and that leads to a damaged relationship between the fans and the club. And I like that he's made it a priority. Obviously, he's not actually in the role yet, it's still 1st of July. He's made it a priority already to better that engagement, and that was the sort of first event of this type. I think maybe the media backlash is because they're seeing it as that warning that Celtic are going to use fan media for some of their media content. I think the way that fans receive media content is changing. I think that fan media see the value. I think that fans see the value in fan media as a source of content, and I think a lot of people enjoy that, and I think the club can really tap into that and use it effectively like they did with this press conference, and I don't think the mainstream media will particularly like that. In saying that, I completely think there is a role for both. As we discussed earlier in the show, there completely is. But what the mainstream media need to be careful of doing is not alienating fans by putting down fan groups. Mm-hmm. Fans like the fan groups. We have a great variety of people who produce podcasts like ours and that fans subscribe to and listen to. Fans like this sort of content. Mainstream media need to be careful not to be condescending and patronising towards that and then turn the fans away from them even more. Fans are very critical of the mainstream media and the angles they have and the agendas they use and some of the questions they pose. The last thing they need to be doing now is being snide towards groups that the fans like, and perhaps limiting their own stream of content users. So I think the mainstream media could do well to accept that there is a role for both, mm-hmm. and that putting fan media down doesn't necessarily put them up. By putting our content down doesn't necessarily make theirs look any better. In fact, it could perhaps be seen to make it look worse. So I think that they need to recognise that there is room for both and embrace it.
I think so. Something has just come to mind. I do recall when Fergus McCann took over at Celtic. Gone by Christmas, Ange's already a failure. He's never even played a game yet. That was charming. He's never even played a game. Fergus McCann, when he come in, and again, I'm always saying how forward-thinking Fergus was. We're talking about season tickets over the last couple of days, Natasha, and the fact that there's a rumoured figure of between 45 and 49,000 renewals already taken up by Celtic fans, which is an incredible figure. Absolutely incredible figure, and it's going to rise. And then there was an announcement on the website talking about the waiting list, because we've got a waiting list that can be tapped into. I don't know what the figure is at the moment, but it has previously risen to upwards of 17,000 on the waiting list, and we are behind the club. And I was talking about the fact that prior to when I started going as a season ticket holder in 1994, the season tickets weren't a big thing. Fergus McCann introduced this to Celtic because he was a businessman and he wanted to know how much money he was going to have at the beginning of the season. And he took that from the Canadian sports that he was in. He had an interest in prior to coming back to save Celtic, and he started building up the season ticket base from there. So some of the figures, which I find absolutely astonishing, 1989, Celtic had 6,000 season ticket holders. 6,000. Wow. Now, that was after the centenary season. 4,000 were in the main stand and 2,000 were in the terracing. Now, the first launch of, the big launch of season tickets under Fergus McCann resulted in 17,000 season ticket holders at Hampden, thanks to Stephen Ray for reminding me of that figure. So that was 17,000. When we went back to Celtic Park, the capacity initially was 37,000, and then we've obviously built the stadium and built the fan base in terms of the season ticket sales as well. So an unbelievable amount of foresight by Fergus McCann. But another thing that he had the foresight on was embracing fan media. So a massive part, obviously, of the sack the board movement was the pavement, street movement of fanzines. The fanzine culture back then, Natasha, was massive. And yes, you reminded me earlier that you are part of the younger breed of ACSOM contributors. So you might not remember the days of buying the Not The View outside the ground. But I loved Not The View. I was a massive fan. But after the takeover, Fergus McCann changed the Celtic View from a kind of broadsheet style to a magazine style. And he embraced the alternative view, because there was actually a section of the magazine called the Alternative View, which was edited at the time by Matt McGlone. So he embraced fan media even back then, back in the 90s. So he had the foresight to do it. And I think Don Mackay has got the kind of communication ability and knowledge to realise that this is a good move. I'm looking forward to it going through the season. One of the downsides, I guess, if you leave the school and you go and study to be a journalist, is that you'll end up working for a title whereby those in charge of that department will tell you to go and get X amount of information, ask the specific questions. That would be difficult because you're being sent in there by your editor to look for a particular narrative. Now, if you or I or Colin or Amy or anyone else goes into a press conference on behalf of a Celtic state of mind, you're never given an agenda. You're never given talking points. You're just, you're asked if you can go, and you go. We try and get as much as we can leading up to it from people who watch the show, and we obviously feed that back. So we've got an idea of what fans want to hear from these press conferences, but there is no agenda.
No.
We just want the best for Celtic Football Club at all times. Some people might disagree with our views, but there definitely is no agenda. And I'm looking forward to going into the new season and covering the men's team, the women's team, and the Colts. So we've probably got about 100 games to cover, maybe more next season. Excellent. Natasha. Sorry for the small technical issue to begin with. I will take that one on the chin. It was my fault. There was something that should have been plugged in that wasn't. But we sorted it, and we gave you an extra 10 minutes at the end of the show to make up for it. Thanks everybody for getting involved. We are trying to get as many commenters involved as we possibly can on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and let us know if there are any trolls in the comment section so we can swiftly block them as well. And all that's left for me to say is thank you to Natasha Meikle for joining me once again on a